Welcome back to CUESEF. How's everybody feeling this morning? Thumbs up. Round of applause if you're feeling pretty good this morning. I am delighted to see all of you returning this morning. I'm delighted to see your smiling faces. Yesterday was a jam-packed day. I think we got a lot of information. We got a lot of necessary information. And I believe that relationships that have been begun will be part of what makes our next steps most beneficial for students and families and communities that we tend to serve. One of the purposes of CUESEF is to really look at issues from a historical perspective. We're often telling the story and starting in the middle. The child did this, the parent did this, the teacher said that, but we often don't take the necessary steps to go back and say what preceded these moments. And not just actions, but what philosophies preceded these moments, what values preceded these moments, and what priorities preceded these moments. And so part of CUESEF is getting us to stop starting the story in the middle, but to start the story at the beginning and telling and talking about some hard truths, those things about which we don't want to speak, those subjects that are difficult to broach. But if we do it together, if we do it with a level of humanity and thinking of the people across the table from us as part of our solution, then I think we'll get to a better place. So we're not here to navigate around the tough issues. We're here to walk to and through them together. And I just open with that because I want to make certain that we are coming into each day with the proper spirit up around the work that we're doing. And I want to make sure that I encourage you to wonder, to engage each other without assumptions, to question yourself, to be challenged, or to be affirmed, but to be changed in some way. It's not about coming back. It's not about leaving as you came. So some key questions are, what did I bring? What do I bring? What do I believe? What did I believe? Tomorrow, I'll be asking you, what's the difference after these 3 days? What difference will this make in my approach to practice, in my views? So make sure we're questioning ourselves throughout the day. It's an iterative process where we start where we are, evaluate that, assess that, and then go back again. So I thank you all for walking into today's spirit with that in mind. Now, I want to get us to our first panel. We're going to start off just like we did yesterday, and I'd like to introduce Crystal Lara. Crystal Lara is Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at Chicago State University. Her teaching, research, and service have focused on the social foundations of education and diversity. One of the key reasons that we're here. We talk about things like diversity, but things like diversity are about numbers. Diversity means let's keep adding more people so the structure doesn't look as bad as it is. Equity and dismantling is what we're trying to do. Diversity is often about masking those systems that maintain systems of oppression. And so I often try to make sure we don't conflate diversity and equity in dismantling because there are differences in how those approaches work. And so with that said, I invite Crystal Lara to the stage. Please come forward. And the rest of our panelists will be joining Crystal as well. We have Kempis, Ghani, Songster, John Pace, Rasheed, Jihad. Please join us. Let's give them a round of applause as they come forward. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to Crystal and invite you to engage. Take care. Are they on?
Hello, hello. Good morning. How y'all doing? This is an odd podium, so I may randomly, there we go, because I need to connect with the folks over on that side of the room. Good morning to all, pardon me?
Oh, there you go.
Real tech savvy around here. Thanks so much. Okay, good morning, folks. Good morning, good morning. Wake up. Because we all have the honor of participating in a discussion with some folks who really will help us think about the larger implications of what we're learning about. We're trying to learn about the school-to-prison pipeline and what to do about it because there is some larger consequence that we want to avoid for lots of young people around us. And I think that this panel will help bring to light the consequences and what we can do differently, and we will learn so much from the lives and experiences of the beautiful people sitting next to me. So I'm super thrilled, partly to kick off the day, partly because I'm gonna learn from these brilliant people. But I just wanna add, before we get started, another sort of prompt or provocation for how we might think about this conversation. I'm gonna ask you to jump in relatively quickly. I'm gonna warm up the room, and I'm gonna ask you to participate and essentially come to the stage or bring your spirit to the stage. But before you do that, I want you to begin to listen and think and conjure some thoughts using these three ideas. One is, what do you wonder? What do you wonder as you walk into the space and also as you listen? What do you worry about? What do you worry about? And what do you question? So when I turn it over to you, you might think about one of those three areas as ways to sort of prompt the conversation and nudge it forward. What do you wonder, what do you worry about, and what do you question? Y'all with me? Fantastic. Okay, so I promised these wonderful people that this would be a really casual, calm, relaxed, chill conversation that is really organized all around their brilliance and the wisdom that they bring to the room. So let us begin then by simply introducing ourselves. All you need to know about me is that I'm here with these fabulous people, and that my preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. But how about you tell us who you are and a little bit about your story, and then we'll go down the line, and then it'll become more of a convo.
Can you hear me? Okay, so first of all, I want to say that I am truly thankful to have the opportunity to be here. You know, a good friend of mine, Juwan, provided me with this opportunity by sharing with Dancy the fact that, what my experience was and what I could potentially bring to this conversation. My name is John Pace. I grew up in Philadelphia. At the age of 17, unfortunately, I was responsible for an older man's life being taken in the course of trying to rob him. I pled guilty to second-degree homicide under the pretense that I would actually only serve 10 years. And ultimately, it was a life sentence. I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. I took responsibility very early, and so that afforded me the opportunity to begin to focus on things that I wanted to do to improve who I was as a person. And so I got the blessing of the United States Supreme Court that came out 2012 that says you can't give children mandatory life sentence. And I was subsequently resentenced October 2016, and I was released 2017, February 2017. So I've been out now 2.5 years, and currently I work at Temple University at a program some of y'all may be aware of it called the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program. And I work with a youth group called Youth Sentencing Reentry Project that deal with young people who encounter the criminal justice system and how do we get them out of the criminal justice system into a juvenile facility, and ultimately how do we transition them back to the community. And so also the men and women who were children when they were sentenced to life without parole, I am the reentry coordinator helping them to transition back to the community. And so those are some of the things that I'm doing currently right now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm often inspired to begin these conversations, these very meaningful conversations and critical conversations, with two pieces of wisdom. The first is by the late Vincent Harding, educator, social justice advocate, and contemporary of Martin Luther King. He said that the entire course of human history leads to right here and right now, wherever we find ourselves. And from right here and now, we are obligated, not constrained by the past or determined by the past, obligated to imagine and create a future that could restore the innocence of the first day. The next piece of wisdom is by Kingman Brewster, who was the president of Yale University for the 1960s. Bob Moses, another educator, often quotes this. It's on the epitaph of Kingman Brewster's gravestone, and it says, "The presumption of innocence is not just a legal concept. In common law and in common sense, it requires a generosity of spirit towards the stranger, the expectation of what is best rather than what is worst in the other." This concept of innocence is something that's, I was very curious about, because I think it is something that I lost quite early in my life. At the age of 15, running away from my home and my mom in Brooklyn, New York, a week before I completed the 9th grade, heading out to Philadelphia, hundreds of miles away, where I ended up joining a gang and engaging in some activities for the next 4 months that I had no business engaging in, selling drugs out of fortified row homes where I was holed up. Matter of fact, everybody that worked in this organization were runaway children, being exploited, not loving ourselves, not loving one another. 4 months after I got to Philadelphia, in one of the drug houses, an explosive act of violence took place that resulted in the murder of one of the other members of the organization. Another child, he was 17 years old, 2 years older than me. I was arrested a week later, sentenced to life without parole. And I know in Pennsylvania, you know that life without parole is not 20 years or 25 years or 30 years, and then you see the parole board. Life without parole means life, your natural life. That's it. And so, if you could only appreciate my appreciation for this moment being here, because I'm not supposed to be here, neither is John. 30 years later, grace came in the form of a resentencing pursuant to the Miller versus Alabama ruling that John spoke about. So another thing John didn't mention is that we're both on lifetime parole. So we're on parole for the rest of our lives. So any given time, we could be taken back, and made to serve out the rest of our lives in prison. And so it's with a special, special sense of gratefulness to be sitting here today. And I'm also grateful that I will be co-teaching a course beginning in the spring 2020 semester at LaSalle University on the intersection of juvenile justice and public health, right? Yeah. Before I pass the mic to my brother, let me acknowledge my appreciation for the spirit that your applause comes from. I know that you don't applaud what we have done. You don't applaud violence, right? It's important to mention that. You don't support what we did. We don't support what we did, right? The applause comes from a different space. And it's important to touch on this because when Malcolm Jenkins and the Philadelphia Eagles sent me to the Super Bowl a month after I came home, news outlets like Breitbart had said, what is this country coming to? We're sending murderers to the Super Bowl now. And so I could imagine what those news outlets would say if they knew what CUESEF was doing here, hosting 3 people, who were formerly incarcerated. And so just to let you know, I know that that is not what you're doing. It's not that you're here honoring murderers. What you applaud for is possibility. You applaud hope, right? And, right, so, right. Because the current crime and punishment narrative that we're confined to is a hopeless narrative. Let's be clear. If someone is murdered, the idea is that they're dead and they're gone. This is a fact. There's no hope in that. The person who took the life is sent away to prison for the rest of their life. They're gone. There's no hope in that. Both families are mired in pain and distress and loss in one form or another. And the politicians And the tough on crime narrative offers no hope in that, right? But when we applaud a dose of hope in the conversation, something that says that by us being here, that maybe there is hope in the human capacity for transformation, even after people have done the ultimate wrong, right? Maybe there's a next level for our species. And I think that's a very promising platform to begin a conversation of this magnitude, you know, where we're going to talk about what role education plays in all of this. So thank you very much. Oh, I got a microphone.
You hear me? Okay. How you doing? I want to thank everybody for coming out, and I want to thank Dr. Dana Thompson for inviting me. I appreciate this opportunity to share my story. Unlike these gentlemen, one thing you have to know is according to the Bureau of Corrections and Statistics, they admit that 1 out of 10 people who are incarcerated is innocent. I was one of those individuals, and so I was charged with the death penalty and with capital murder for wrongful incarceration. To preference it, I was 21 years old. I was in a motorcycle accident. I was in a coma for like 3 days. And I actually worked through that process of learning how to walk over and working through the hurt and the pain from the accident. So I decided to take a break from, you know, the regular routine of being home and working through my journey of trying to get better. I decided to travel to meet with a group of friends of mine from college to hang out because they wanted to show me to a good time for the weekend. That weekend turned into a 12-year visit in prison for a wrongful murder. I was taught that anytime you're arrested, you don't say anything, right? And so as a result of me not saying anything, they charged me with the death penalty, and co-defendants said that I was a trigger man and I was never at the scene of a crime, never had a gun in my hand. But that's the system of incarceration in America, you know? You don't have to be at the scene of the crime, and you don't have to have a gun for a murder. You know, the fact that you're young, and my story is a host of many stories. There's nothing unique about my experience. But the one thing that helped me was that, you know, I had a supportive family. I was a junior in college, so in prison, the average level of education is less than 7th grade, okay? So me being a junior in college going to prison was like, I was like, you know, like a brain, like a scholar. And so what I did was I turned my prison cell into a classroom and turned the prison into a university. And so I utilize all of my time and all my focus to empower others educationally as well as myself. And so with the support of my family and the fact that within the prison population, we were able to develop programs educationally and connect individuals to that opportunity so that when they transcend outside the prison, they'll be able to take care of their families and take care of themselves. So for me, education was very critical. It was very important, and it's become my life work. So I've done work inside the prison, and then after prison, I came home. I got my master's degree, and then started doing the work, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that. So, yeah.
I want to jump into, and maybe throw it back at you, Rasheed,
Okay.
to focus on that fact that you just brought up around the gross sort of undereducation of folks who are incarcerated. It's like it's a thing, right?
Yes.
which is really important given the folks in this room and the theme of this particular conference. Oftentimes it's difficult for humans generally, but also educators more specifically, to make connections between schools and prisons, or education and incarceration. So I think that, you know, some of the things you've brought up, but certainly what you just mentioned around the education level of people who are incarcerated specifically really highlights that there is some sort of entanglement. Can you speak to that entanglement? Can you speak to the role of education and schooling, or lack thereof, in incarceration?
I think the common thread is the importance of engagement. Engagement, so that's very critical, whether it's a child that's 5 years old or an adult that's 18 years old. The most important thing is you take the time to engage them, you know, because you have a situation where a child can be the most beautiful, humble, wholesome, and bubbling child, right? And then you look to see at that child at 18 or 19 who is engulfed in drug use or drug sales, or, I mean, behavior just terrible, and then they end up in prison. But we wonder, how did that transition go from one stage to the next? And what I found is that oftentimes we don't take the time to engage our children. When you ask your child, a simple question is, you know, how was your day at school today? Oh, it was good. Can't stop there. For me, it's like, good, what is good for you? Because good for you may be, oh, we found a purse in the classroom and we took the money and we went and spent it. So your good may not be my good. So take the time to engage them in what is good to you, or how was school? And so I think that's very important. And in prison, one thing I noticed is that we were faced with the challenge of being able to challenge and motivate individuals who are not able to motivate and challenge themselves. And so that became the question when we talked about education inside the prison system. So one thing that we did is we developed critical thinkers through critical dialogue. Because I found that just like the young kids, folks in prison are more inclined to talk than they are to read. So you have to engage them through that conversation. And then you look up and you say, wow, you know what I mean? They're like, well, where did you get that information from? Because they're so inspired by the information that you give them, they're not used to getting that one-on-one peer mentoring, and you actually taking the time to actually feed their mind and to engage them. But once you develop that relationship with them, like in the school systems, just as in prison, they become intrigued, they become motivated, they become attracted to the things that you say. And then they watch your behavior. And then ultimately, you see them mimicking the things that you're doing, whether it's reading the same book that you read, whether it's being positive, you know, because they're attracted to that in a sense. And so I found that when you educate, you change the thinking. When you change the thinking, ultimately the behavior changes. And that's the cycle of transformation that we have to take inside the educational system from a young age to an adulthood.
Yes, please.
Okay, can you, is this working? All right, so education was always a part of my life. You know, being born in Trinidad, this is a country that had a literacy rate of 98% for as long as I could remember. The teachers would discipline us and stuff like literally with the rod at the time when I was born. Back in 72, between 72 and 79, before I came to this country, I came here in 79. Everybody had to wear uniforms, all students in all grades. And so education was a big part of my life, but it was important to me only because it was important to the grown people around me. It had yet to become important to me. And, but that discipline that was instilled in me for education carried over when I immigrated to the States. Did very well in school in Brooklyn, New York, all advanced grades from the first grade on up to junior high school, went to Philippa Schuyler, which was a school for the gifted and talented. But by 86, that it seemed like my grades started to dip. you know, I knew this was important to my mother, but it started to wane. The importance of education started to wane in my mind when something baleful started to creep into our neighborhoods, and that something was crack cocaine. And I think as educators, and this is a piece for all the educators in this room, you know, when we get to prison and we sit on the edge of our bunks like I did for many, many days and many, many nights in the dark, pacing the floor in the dark of my cell and sitting in the thinking man position, asking myself, how did I end up here? How could I do something that rendered me unrecognizable to my own mother, right? Retracing my life, unpacking. I only had 15 years, so it wasn't a whole lot to unpack. So best believe I unpacked it. You dig what I'm saying? If anything I understand at the age of 47 today is my first 15 years. You know what I'm saying? And let me tell you, because what we learned in school did not prepare us for the crack era. It did not prepare us for that. And crack cocaine, I never did the drug, even though I was around the drug every day. And I was stupid in every other way. I was smart not to do no drugs for some reason, right? But crack cocaine changed you and affected you whether you did the drug or not. Y'all know that. Y'all know crack cocaine changed everything. It changed the whole culture. It changed our family structures. You dig what I'm saying? It changed our music. It changed the way we even perceive ourselves and the way we talk to each other. It was like crack cocaine was like a holocaust in our communities that we still haven't recovered from, right? And our education didn't prepare us for that, because what we were taught in school was you need an education so that you can grow up and get a good job, get gainful employment. You know, the American dream. And for us, the American dream was a house, a car, you know what I'm saying, with a lawn, with a house with a lawn, security, and these kind of things. It was strictly material. And so when crack cocaine came along and made propositions and temptations to young unfortunates in inner cities, like myself, made propositions of an express lane, a scenic route, a shortcut, a portal hole to the American dream, right? We just went right along with it. We got sucked in. Education became a long, tedious, life-consuming, fruitless route to the American dream, in my mind. And that line of thinking is what yanked me from my loving mother's home and landed me in a bad situation. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the part of the school-to-prison pipeline that we haven't really fleshed out. The very concept of education that we were given, the school-to-prison pipeline, I hope we don't think that the school-to-prison pipeline came about with the implementation of metal detectors and police, and that if you remove it, then the school-to-prison pipeline will be effectively dismantled. When Malcolm X was told in the 8th grade by his teacher that he couldn't be a lawyer, he was effectively flushed down the school-to-prison pipeline. Let's be clear, right? And so the school-to-prison pipeline for people of color existed since schools was built. You dig what I'm saying? And so it's the very concept of education. We have to realize that education has went through several developments and changes. From when you go back to Greco-Roman times, education, it was about training up young boys and stuff to become philosophers and politicians, and they would impart or parse out information or knowledge to the ignorant masses. In feudal Europe time, it became something else. You know what I'm saying? In the Reformation time, it became, and everybody wanted to learn how to read the Bible. And in the industrial era, people wanted an education so that they can get a job in factories. And now what we have is universities today every year turning out students with all kind of degrees and skills to fit into the existing system, the very system that we rail against. We're educating students and producing them, you know what I'm saying, to uphold and maintain the status quo. And we think that if we just, You know, even though the universities are getting bigger and bigger, the ability of students to make socially responsible decisions have been on a decline, right? And we think, as faculty and administration of the universities, that so long as we, you know, adhere to the pragmatic and utilitarian value and philosophy of, okay, just as long as we give them what it takes to get a good job, right, then we've done our job, despite the fact that what we're doing is we're reducing students to cogs in the wheel of American economic and technological advancement, and students are just pursuing their own individual ambitions instead of thinking about how they can create a more livable world for everybody. You dig what I'm saying? And so that is effectively the school-to-prison pipeline, and so that moral piece, that higher responsibility piece, is what was missing when somebody came to me and stuck a proposition in front of my face about this is how you can make, you know, you don't have to go to school. You can make all the money you want to make. I didn't have that moral filter, you know what I'm saying, that I needed to be like, well, this won't help me be an upstanding member of my community. And you would think that these things were instilled in me by my mother, and she tried, but she was a single mother, working 16 hours a day, coming home. She didn't have the time to sit down and talk with me about these deeper things like this. You know what I'm saying? And all the stuff that she tried to instill with me, as soon as I turn on the TV or the radio, I step out the door, I get bombarded by everything to contradict everything that she told me. You know that's what it's like. So children is caught in a tug of war between everything that their mother's trying to instill in them and their teachers is trying to instill in them and everything else. And it's a siren song out there that's calling children that parents and teachers just don't hear. You know, and so this is just some things that I turned over in my mind in prison. But when I got arrested, after I ran away, who you think I called? My mother. You dig? Even though I dissed her like that and ran away and she came home and didn't know if I was alive or dead for months. And I act like I didn't know where the love was. I knew where the love was for real, for real. And I didn't call no homies. I called my mother. And when she came down on Amtrak, bringing pajamas from New York to Philly to see me at the police station, bringing pajamas and underwear and what she thought I would need, she brought 3 things. 3 books, the autobiography of Malcolm X, the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, and Mark Mathabani's Kaffir Boy. And that's what started me on my path to education behind the walls. Yeah.
Ooh, being a moderator is hard. There was so much in there. I want to back up and just talk about the synergy between those 2 comments, though. This idea around engagement really being at the crux of us taking seriously this idea of dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. Oftentimes, we are looking for this big to-do. We're looking for the big, this is what you need to do. If I tell you this one thing, if we change this one policy, if we get the dogs out of our schools from sniffing our babies, if we move the metal detectors, then that'll be the end-all to be-all. But I think Rasheed's comment around engagement helps us see lots of possibilities that go beyond those specific policies. We can imagine so many different ways to engage young people, to honor young people, to invite their expertise into the room by focusing on this concept of engagement. Y'all know Jawanza Kunjufu? Some folks in the room. Many folks I'm all Chicago, sorry, Chi-Town till I die. Okay, so Jawanza Kunjufu may be most popular for the conspiracy to destroy black boys, but he's known for lots of other things too. And one thing that I find so helpful for thinking about the work that is to be done to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline, which Rasheed is bringing up for me, is this idea that you cannot teach a child you do not love, you cannot teach a child you do not respect, and you cannot teach a child you do not understand. Love, trust, understanding. Those, to me, are really the 3 fundamental components of what it takes to create a productive learning environment. So if we take those 3 components and sort of tuck them underneath this commitment to engagement, we really have some concrete possibilities for how to do our work differently, yeah? So, you know, if we connect this piece of engagement to under preparation for real life, which is part of what I'm hearing you say, Ghani. Like, what are we preparing our young people to do when we show up to work each day? What are our curricular possibilities? What are we saying in what we teach, or what we decide to teach and how we teach it? What are we saying and how we relate to young people? What are we saying in terms of the kinds of questions and information that we are circling in our classrooms? Are those things preparing young people for the world around them? Are they preparing them for freedom, which, John, I'm going to ask you about in a moment? Or are we preparing them for permanent institutionalization? And I really appreciate the depth within which you just offered us this explanation of preparation not for freedom, preparation for something else that didn't enable you to make the best of those first 15 years, right? John, I want you to jump in and help us expand this idea of preparation for what? Folks in this room came because, one, you feel grossly underprepared to deal with the school-to-prison pipeline, yeah? Two, because you want to know, like today, like yesterday, what you can be doing when you go back to work to do things differently, yeah? And so I think we should be trying to support folks in the room and think about what might it look like then with this idea of the school-to-prison pipeline and what we know about the expansion of the prison nation and what we know about how young folks come to the prison nation under-schooled. What could we be doing for things to be otherwise? What might preparation for freedom look like? And maybe you can draw on the Redemption Project. Maybe you can draw on your other works and the other education work that you've been doing post-release.
So one of the things I want to just go back just a little bit, in hearing both of the brothers' comments, and so one of the things I will say is, and Ghani, you do acknowledge it goes back further than that, but I think who informed us was Malcolm X, what his experience was. So it wasn't just the crack era. It was when you go back to Malcolm X, Cloyd Brown, and Man Child in the Promised Land, he gives his experience. These things existed way before the crack epidemic. And so we know this. We know these elements that exist in urban community in terms of some of the challenges that people are confronted with. And so one of the things, ideally, we would say, the parents should be paying attention, engaging young people. But what about the other institutions? What about the churches? And so what about, you're talking about the family, the churches, as well as the education system. So all of them need to be engaged in them. And so when I was thinking about that, I think about my experience and how I went through the school system, and I didn't feel like I was really conscientious of, what that process was like. And it really took what Ghani said. Once I went to prison, an older guy came to me, and he began to provide me with books. He began to engage me in conversation and tell me about institutional things that exist that may have contributed to me making poor decisions, systematic things that exist that contribute to it. When he started engaging me, and I started thinking, I think, more in a critical way, as opposed to just, you going through the system in a perfunctory way. I'm thinking more critically, like, why was I making these bad decisions? What was there? What was these elements that contribute to me, falling prey to these things that my mother didn't see? And so once he started engaging me like that, it brought me to a certain level of consciousness. And this wasn't just academic. This was just making me conscious of me as a young a person of color engaged in the world. And so it really, there was a light that popped up. So when you talk about freedom, it's like, and some people, they may not think this is important, but this is the world in which many young people of color exist in. They exist in a world that is very hostile to them. And so how are you teaching them to survive this hostility? And so I think you need to really begin to engage them in these conversations, not in a way that makes them angry or anything, but being aware of these elements that exist that you may fall prey to, and how do you surpass these things? And so that's the conversation I'm thinking that you need to, in terms of gaining that freedom, making them more conscious of the elements that exist in our community that they could easily fall prey to. So those levels of engagement, I think, that are important for them.
Even the piece around critical thinking, I think, is absolutely essential. And so what I think, what I'm hearing from John is like there are two pieces of being a critical thinker, right? One is what we traditionally think about. We think about critical thinking, your ability to develop well-reasoned arguments, right? We're all smart people, we got degrees, we run classrooms, et cetera. But what I hear John saying is that we need to be thinking critically, as in we look at the world and ask, what am I seeing? Who does it serve? Who does it marginalize? And how can things be otherwise? Y'all with me? Critical thinking, not just as in the ability to develop well-reasoned arguments, but to look at the world and ask, how are things? Who does it serve? Who does it marginalize? And how can things be otherwise? So y'all know, the phrase, it is what it is. Someone who is not critical lives by that. It just is what it is. You accept what it is, and you move on with your life as best as you can. But if you are a critical thinker, a critical educator, someone who utilizes critical pedagogy, you are deliberately trying to push against this notion that it is what it is, because you want to know who the policies, practices, and processes are serving, who they are pushing away, who they are disengaging, and how things can be otherwise, yeah? John also brings up, y'all know educators, I don't know why we do it, but we tend to do things in threes. Brings up the three ways that sometimes we talk about the school to prison pipeline that might confuse us. So as we think about ways to concretely move forward, let me just clear something up. There is the school to prison pipeline, and then there are three close cousins. There are three derivatives. They are not twins. They are close cousins, and I need y'all to write this down. So we hear the school to prison pipeline, right, which as we've identified as a crew is this whole idea, metaphor, real life trajectory for young folks, particularly young folks of color, particularly young folks of color and of poverty, particularly young folks of color and of poverty, and of some other sort of disadvantage, right, or something that can be framed as a disadvantage, vulnerability, rather. But the school to prison pipeline is often talked about in three different ways. Y'all ready? One is the cradle to prison pipeline. And I'm giving you this not just for lingo, but because as John is pointing out, there are lots of different things that we need to be focused on. There's a lot of work to be done. Part of it is around education, which, is sort of the focus of this conference, and that's where we're going to put our energy. But John is pointing out that it's not just about schools, that there are all kinds of institutions that are supporting this trajectory from schools to the streets to jails and to prisons. And Cradle to Prison Pipeline helps to capture that. Perhaps I'll talk about that later, but maybe I'll ask folks to kind of dig into that. But I want you to know, Cradle to Prison Pipeline. Another is schoolhouse to jailhouse track. Y'all heard that one? A third is school-prison nexus. Cradle to Prison Pipeline focuses on the policies and practices beyond schools. Things like legal policies. Y'all were here yesterday, yeah? So the conversations that you probably heard yesterday really help us understand the Cradle Prison Pipeline, that essentially from birth, some babies, some students, some young people don't even have the opportunity to get on the right track because there aren't macroeconomic policies and laws that enable communities to really support their young people in ways that get them on the right track. Y'all still with me? Schoolhouse to jailhouse track really focuses on school-based policies and practices that nudge young people out of our spaces because they are disengaged, because we haven't figured out how to prep them for real life, because we haven't figured out how to really connect with them and teach them what they need. And School-Prison Nexus reminds us that corrections is big business. That a lot of folks really depend on us educators not doing our jobs because there are cells that need to be filled. So, John, I appreciate you nudging us to think broadly and also let folks know there is work to be done, lots of different places, lots of different institutions. So criticality as a skill that we can be shoring up as educators. We can help ourselves be more critical. We can help our students be more critical as a skill to teach for freedom. And also really clarifying the fact that there are different ways to approach this work, and there are a lot of institutions that participate. Tell us about the Redemption Project.
So Ghani can also speak about the
Yep.
Redemption Project, but the Redemption Project is a project that was started probably around about, the impetus for the idea is probably 2005. This is before or right after the United States Supreme Court came down in a case called Roper versus Simmons that ruled that it was unconstitutional to execute children. And so I was introduced to a professor from St. Joe's University, and he wanted to show, do little vignettes about children who were sentenced to hard sentence, particularly life without parole. And so we began to start the conversation. He began to bring his students in. Ghani got the opportunity to meet some of the students, and we had other juveniles, men that were juveniles sentenced to life without parole, sit down with students and share their story. And then something happened. We didn't get that started, but what happened is a few years later, we re-engaged him in this conversation. And so what we was thinking about how do we begin to educate the world about children who've been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and despite that reality that many of us face, that we were resilient despite that many of us went on to get college degrees and adorn many of actually teaching courses like Ghani, some of his stories that he might share, I think it's part of his bio, programs that he developed and taught while he was in prison. This existed throughout the prison. And this existed amongst people who believed that they would never spend or never get the opportunity to get out of prison. And so, one of the things, just to connect it again, why did it take place in prison? Why didn't this happen prior to many of us going to prison? And so the Redemption Project was mainly designed to be able to highlight that the fact that Pennsylvania in particular was throwing away children and saying that you were irredeemable, and here we are, despite that reality, demonstrating that we are capable of changing and are doing wonderful things while incarcerated. And so now, one of the things we're doing now as we transition out, we're trying to show how we're transitioning back to the community, that we were the children that were condemned for the rest of our lives, but many of us now are out in the communities doing things that we could have been doing years ago in terms of helping to contribute to to avoid some of this school to prison pipeline stuff had we been given this opportunity early. And so this is what we're highlighting now, projects that we're working on now, and Ghani's a part of the Redemption Project as well, and he might want to say a little bit.
Only thing I want to say is another thing. Let's be clear that this is not making a case for prison. We're not this way because of prison. We're this way in spite of prison. You dig what I'm saying? So, we don't, and I don't want to say because my brother here been chomping at the bit to address something that you were talking about before. And so I don't want to take up too much time on that, but I just want to put that out there, that prison is not, this is not saying that prison is good for us, or it was good for us. You understand? Because if it was good, it wouldn't be, if prison supported the kind of education that we got in a state like Pennsylvania where you have 31 prisons, right? Why is there only one prison with a college program, right? And that was at Greater Ford. Greater Ford is closed down, and Phoenix, which is the prison they built right next door to that, took the place of Greater Ford. And they have Villanova is there, and John and I were in Villanova, and where they actually have professors coming in every day and teaching a real course. It's a bachelor's program. And in a prison like Greater Ford, or Phoenix now, which has a capacity to hold 5,000 people, the largest in the state, the sixth largest in the country, you only have about, 20-something people on the college roster. You dig what I'm saying? And so, this is not, it's not like prison really supports education. You dig what I'm saying? We got to fight. We had to fight to get the Pell Grant back. And right now, Congress is making this push to re-implement the Pell Grant, but they're also pushing to exclude people serving life without parole from the Pell Grant. And that's a problem. You know, because like Daniel Sir had said, you know, Michelle Alexander brought up that book, Until We Reckon. Please get that book, Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair. In there, she said that you cannot, just as we cannot incarcerate our way out of violence, we cannot reform our way out of incarceration without taking on the question of violence. And if we think that, you know, nonviolent drug offenders, you know, is the cause of mass incarceration, we're sadly mistaken. That classification of people who've committed offenses make up only 16 to 17% of the incarcerated population in the country. Over 51% are people that are in there for some kind of violent offenses. People serving life without parole are in the violent classification. You understand what I'm saying? So excluding people serving life without parole from the benefits of the Pell Grant is basically continuing this country's, you know what I'm saying, age-oldest culture of condemnation, you know, basically saying that people who've committed violence have no redeemable qualities. It's impossible for them to be transformed and changed and to become assets to their communities. I think John and I sitting up here is like a contradiction to that narrative. And also, you know, it's basically saying that people serving life without parole or people that have violent offenses are not even worthy of an education, right? And that it's also a way for this country and for this political system to avoid taking on the issue of violence and the crisis of violence in this country with all its complexities. And like Daniel Surratt also says, in our zero-sum system, complexity is a liability, right? So with that said, I know you've been chomping at the bit, brother. I know we probably done went way off for but I know you had something, he had something important he really wanted to say.
It's actually, it's all needed. So everything that was said, both you and John and the moderator, it's all needed. I was just looking at when you brought up critical thinkers, and also when we talk about education, there's a difference between information and education. When I was in prison, I read the Marvin Collins Way, and the difference in, you know, informing someone and educating someone. I think this whole model and system of education that we have today is that we want to inform the student as much as we possibly can so that they can become more marketable and a slave wager and employee. And then the difference between information and education is education empowers you. And so what I saw in prison versus what I see also in, which is the common thread of the young kids that I see in school, is that they're not being challenged. And so when you educate them, you empower them. And when you empower someone, you don't look for employment, you create employment, which is the reason why you have a bunch of folks who are so-called educated, who have multiple degrees and who are not working, because they haven't been challenged to the point that they're able to take that information and create for themselves. And so in the Marvin Collins Way, the reason why she was so successful is because she was challenging them to be critical thinkers. And that's very critical. If you're not challenging them, if you're not allowing them to look at them circumstances, and whether it's a psychology course, a business course, or whatever that course is, to allow them to see themselves in that curriculum, they will not be able to take from that to be able to do for themselves. And so a business partner and mine, we were able to develop the psychology of incarceration in prison, because we've seen that many of the folks who are incarcerated prior to their arrest because of the self-imposed limitations that we put on ourselves, which is to say that, you know, I'm not good enough to get this job, I can't get into Harvard University, she's too attractive for me, he's too attractive for me, you know, those self-imposed limitations that we put on ourselves, we tell ourselves no. And so we develop a curriculum around that, which is at Wright State University today, and we get semester, quarter book sales just from, challenging individuals and allow them to looking at their circumstances and create and develop, critical thinkers so that they can create for themselves and create for others. So I think as educators, that's very important, and you have to continue to challenge them to a level, and don't just look at the institution of education, just say, okay, you have your bachelor's degree, you have your doctorate degree, now you can be a better employee, but what are you going to do with that? What are you going to create with that? We need more creators than we need educators. Educators are important, but we need to preference that and put it in perspective so that we can start doing other things for other folks.
Yeah.
Right, pretty much like to affirm your point is I graduated from Villanova, but I don't think that I would have engaged Villanova studies the way I did had I not had that early experience, which was the encounter with the older gentleman that connected me with Malcolm X, connected me with many historical books. Once that connected me, it gave me an identity. It gave me a sense of purpose. So once I went to Villanova, I began to look at that academics in a very different way. And so when he's talking about, I think I had a purpose when I went in now. Now, how do I take this information and utilize it for what I already gained already? And so when I'm thinking about what he's saying about terms of that critical engagement that benefits you, I think the term you kept, that gives you that sense of freedom, that you connected to who you are, you know who you are, but now you're able to go out and get information to help develop that there, and that's what I was able to do once I went to Villanova. But it was that original, experience that I had with an older gentleman that didn't go to college, that began to refer to me to particular books and engage me in critical conversation.
I would ask my mother many, many years later, decades later, why did you bring me those books? Why did you give me the autobiography of Malcolm X? Why did you give me the autobiography of Nelson Mandela and Mark Martha Brown's Comfort Boy? And she told me specifically about Malcolm and Mandela. She said, look, where you were, I knew I could no longer protect you. And she didn't, when she came down to the police station, she didn't cuss me out, she didn't grind me up, matter of fact, me and my mother still have yet to sit down to this day, and I've been home 18 months after 30 years. We still haven't sat down and had a conversation about why I did, because as a mother, of course, she refused to, she doesn't even want to think about that, and I understand that. But when we talk about why she gave me those 3 books, she told me that, look, I knew that Malcolm's story, I read his story, I know Mandela's story, and both of them were in prison, and they made out fairly well, so that was the only thing I could give to you. I couldn't protect you from where you were. I was hoping that you would get something in there to sustain you, preserve you, and help you find your way back to your humanity, and I think she was on to something. With Malcolm and Mandela, it was 2 different, scenarios. Malcolm, they put him in prison, then he became conscious. Mandela, they put him in prison because he was conscious. But Malcolm, when I read Malcolm, that was the first book I read in the Youth Studies Center, at the age of 15, and I can't even describe to you how only way I could describe it as an explosion of brain cells. It just, with each page, I just felt, it just opened me up to so many bigger things other than my puerile pursuits that I was on and my ignorance and selfishness. I just felt so bad, you know what I'm saying? And but it gave me hope because I saw in Malcolm, he did the same kind of things, but he found his way back. So it showed me that I can find my way back. There is a way that I could regain my humanity and moral rectitude. And so Malcolm became the model for all of us behind the walls, And so the education that led me to where I am now is a self-education, for real, And it gave me the thirst that I saw Malcolm had for knowledge, and how it gave him power. The kind of power I think I was looking for as a young boy, that juice, you know what I'm saying, that made me want to run away from home and plunge myself into the most dangerous situation and stupid situation possible, that made me chase adventure, was because I was really looking for respect and dignity amongst my peers because of so many poor showings in situations dealing with bullies and getting robbed and so on and so forth, that I was determined not to feel like that no more, even if I had to become the one that do the taking. You understand what I'm saying? But Malcolm, he showed me that what I seen education did for him and for Mandela, it gave them a power to move the atmosphere, to move consciousness, to reshape themselves, reinvent themselves, and reshape their environments. I thought that was the power. That was real power. You know what I'm saying? And neither one of them wanted an education so they could get a good job. You understand what I'm saying? For them, education was a different kind of concept. It was about how do they make more socially responsible decisions? How do they tap into that distinct human capacity to look deeply at society and the world, to see what's wrong about it, what's anti-human, what's anti-life and anti-nature about it, and come up with ways to fix it, right? It was that piece that Ella Baker, you know, I got from Ella Baker, that education is supposed to position its students to become central actors, right? To step into history, to follow their own best interests, to get down to and understand root causes, to face a system that does not lend itself to their needs, to move the plot along, to devise means by which to change the system. This is a different kind of education here. You dig what I'm saying? That was totally different from what I was being given in school. Had I been given this, I think I would have been prepared to deal with the crack cocaine era and people trying to push that stuff in my face. You know what I'm saying? And then reading Joel Bacan's words in Childhood Under Siege, where he talked about how over the course of the 20th century, we as a human species achieved something entirely new. We gave ourselves the power to destroy ourselves. We've invented atomic weapons that could wipe out entire cities, synthetic chemicals that could poison our bodies and environments, fossil fuel burning machines that pollute and warm the globe. Alone or in combination, these could severely strain or end life as we know it on Earth. Especially in light of these new dangers, the question of how we educate young people is of pressing importance. Education must be a much grander project than preparing young people to succeed in the global economy. It must also prepare young people to understand that economy, to question and critically assess its virtues and weaknesses, to have and pursue ideals, and to work against our apparent tendency in certain capacity as human societies to be self-destructive. These must be the larger jobs of education. I knew I was self-destructive on the streets. You understand what I'm saying? So this kind of education, you know what I'm saying, made me want to really address and uproot those things in me that I would learn through my studies was really not me for real, you know?
I want to invite you to the conversation, but I want to just tell you that what I'm hearing is that really the charge for us as educators is to co-create with young people a kind of educational experience that sets their souls on fire. What would that mean? What would that look like to be a teacher who sets young folks' souls on fire, and our own, right? Since this is a process of humanization for young people and us too. So I want you to bring your spirit to the stage. Folks are coming with it. So I would love to have you think out loud with us about what you wonder, what you worry about, or what you question, given what you came into the room with, or perhaps what you picked up during the time that we've been in conversation.
I have several nephews and other relatives who are incarcerated. I spend a lot of time, you know, at one time your mom could bring you pajamas. Now, with the big old complex, they have to contact a store, they have to ship it, they have to pay all these costs, or you look through the catalog because it's big money. My question now is the books that you opened up with, that you're expressing in it, how it developed your deep consciousness. There are restrictions, especially in Pennsylvania prisons right now. You can't use color paper, every white paper, white envelopes, because they've had some issues. In having books sent, do you think the prisons right now would mind any of those named books that you said and others of deep, something that would set somebody's soul on fire, that when a child went to a classroom, the teacher could teach like their hair was on fire? Okay, that's what I want to know. If you have some suggested books, or you think, I wrote down those because I know them myself, but do you think with the attitude of the prison right now, that would be looked at and viewed, that's what I question, would it be too militant for them? Would it be too provocative? What?
The list of banned books in the DOC is about this thick. It started out about this thick, and it grows every day. And on that list, especially now with the implementation of the new DOC policies, which restricts, well, we battled that out last year, and we got them to push back a little bit on that, you know, where now all the books go to a particular prison. Yeah, right, and then they sort through it, and then they send it to the different jails and prisons for the intended recipients. But the predominant books that's available to folks on the inside are like e-books. And on that list is not the autobiography of Malcolm X. On that list is not the new Jim Crow, right? On that list is not Assata, the autobiography of Assata Shakur. On that list is not 100 Years of Lynchings. On that list is not the ISIS Papers. On that list is, you know, and a lot of these books, these are just history books, but they define it as militant. They define it as potentially disrupting the normal runnings of the institution. They define it as security concerns. But these are history books. You know what I'm saying? So it makes you wonder, you know, what kind of people the DOC and the prison industrial complex is trying to produce. You know, and we know the answer to that. This is a human industrial warehousing complex. And they want bodies. You know, they don't want human beings that are accountable. You know, we want we want accountability for harm. We want when people do harm, they should be held accountable. There is no healing without accountability. But accountability is not sitting in the cell vegetating, generating money for corporations and industries. You dig what I'm saying?
Recidivism is big business.
That's right. My brother said it, recidivism is big business, the revolving door, and every day. So let me tell you, sitting up here on this stage, we do not have the luxury of, we're not here as scholars. I know I'm certainly not. I'm here as a witness, right? Not a witness to data, but a witness to the bowels of mass incarceration, seeing it with my own eyes every day, right? Looking through the lens not of statistics, right? But through a lived experience. We saw every day lines and lines of people being marched in through the hallways, new arrivals in orange jumpsuits and shackles and handcuffs, every day. And you could literally hear the DOC cash registers ringing, cha-ching, 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 right? Every day. Young faces, young like mine, you know, and a lot of them leaving children out there that are underage. And that's the thing. You know, the intergenerational, and those children, and so, not to be discursive, but that's one of the programs I was involved in co-designing, co-founding Behind the Walls, which is Fathers and Children Together, or FACT program, because we realized that, you know, the most pernicious effects of mass incarceration is seen in the struggles of children. And even if we were to empty all the prisons right now and shut down all prisons and effectively end mass incarceration, the effects of mass incarceration is going to ripple for generations, right? Because children of incarcerated parents for many reasons, are 7 times more likely, 85% more likely to be incarcerated themselves if no positive intervention is made in their lives. And we're talking about 3 million children plus out there that are like that, right? And children of incarcerated mothers are 6 times more likely to end up in the foster care system than children of incarcerated fathers. And all of them more prone to depression, anxiety, school phobias, and all kind of psychological drawbacks, you know. And so, you know, when I see people coming in through the prison every day, and you, John, you used to see them in lines, like droves, like slave couples. You understand what I'm saying? And I would see beyond them and see what was behind them, their children, their families, and so on and so forth. And so the effects of this thing, mass incarceration, we haven't even really begun to scratch the surface of the damage of the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. Sure, we've looked at it and analyzed it through a variety of lenses. We know the economical waste and burdens it puts on society. We know about, you know, the perpetuation of America's age-old inequities through mass incarceration. You know, people like Michelle Alexander lays that out, lays it to bear before us. We know it's assault on education. We haven't even begun to study mass incarceration at the intersection of environmental justice and public health. This is a national health crisis. Mass incarceration is not just about the 2.3 to 2.7 million people within the physical confines of the prisons, behind the walls and razor wire fences. Mass incarceration is about also what it does to the rest of the 320 million of us, right? And so, yeah, so sister, you know, those books, you know, they're not on the list. They're banned because the prison industrial complex is not about producing the kind of people that's going to get out and don't come back.
Just to add very briefly, so if you know that, and so as educators, you know that in terms of what these books do, in terms of helping people to think critically, and they avoid you from having the opportunity to read these things so that you can begin to think critically. These are some of the challenges that you're going to be faced as educators in terms of trying to make young people to become more critical thinkers. So you're going to be facing these particular barriers, and so that's one thing just to be aware of. So.
The questions, wonderings, worries? Oh, there we go.
Good morning. I have a question for each of you. If you could briefly just reflect on your experience in school prior to incarceration, and if you could think of 1 or 2 things that may have contributed or may not have, but impacted your pathway as far as where you found yourself as far as being incarcerated. If there's something that was missing, or even what would you say to your previous educational instructors, teachers, et cetera? If there's anything you can think of.
I'll start, and I think I'm probably going to take this from, so me and Ghani had the opportunity, I would say pleasure, recently to participate in conversation with mothers who lost children. And so we were engaging them in conversation, and something that he said that stuck with me. For me, my experience, it was like a blur. I didn't really critically, I didn't seem like I was engaged at all. And I was more preoccupied with, I think, probably peers and a lot of the elements that existed out in the street. And unfortunately, I was raised by a single mother raising 11 children. And so oftentimes, when I came home, I was able to just go right out in the street. And so that became my learning environment. And so one of the things I think that Ghani said was, parents, you need to pay attention to your children when they're not talking to you. And so that's one of the things that I'm thinking about, is the fact that I didn't talk to my mother. I was learning from many of those elements that existed in the street, and I wasn't being engaged. You know, what was I thinking? And so that's one of the things I think was a big factor for me. And so it goes to your point, learning to engage that child, if they're not talking to you in particular, to know exactly what they're thinking, you know.
Yeah, beware when your child start keeping secrets. you know, because again, like my mother, she didn't know what was brewing in my mind. She didn't know the inner demons that was, you know, was playing inside my head. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, she just came home one day, and at least she didn't recognize them as signs. You know, me just coming home, you know, because she was at work when I came home, throwing the book bag down and just laying on the bed and just like, I would learn later from, you know, being diagnosed with depression, you know, and, you know, attempting suicide and all of that and stuff like that, even before I ran away, you know. And this is something that a lot of young people coming up in the cities and everywhere, in suburbs, everywhere in this country is dealing with. But, you know, my thing to single mothers, and it shouldn't just be on single mothers, fathers need to step up, you know, need to step up, you know. But to mothers that's holding it down by themselves, unfortunately, you know, at the end of the day, that's coming home so burnt out and tired, I guess still got to find some way to engage the child, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like you said, how was your day? Even though the dishes is piled up in the sink, you see the homework ain't done, and the child might have just jumped off the cell phone. You see that, but then, you know, you get to it. But first thing, how was your day? Engage the child, get the child talking, hug, kisses, and all of that. And then after all of that, then, you know, as far as them dishes in the sink, is it you can't handle that or something? You know, but you know, but the main thing is to protect and preserve the relationship, right? The main thing is to protect and preserve the relationship, and so yeah, that's what I got to say about that.
To answer your question, like for me, it was the folks that I was around challenged me to have a strong sense of self. That's important, and that and I was aware culturally, and so the educators that I was influenced by allowed me to be more inspired when I was incarcerated, because I went in as a junior in college, so I've already worked through the education. I was almost a senior, and so that strong sense of self helped me to challenge other individuals in prison to get a strong sense of self. And I must have tutored about 500 men, allowed them to get their GEDs, and we put 700 prisoners through the education system. They were able to get their associate degrees and bachelor's degrees as a result of that. Before they took the Pell Grant, I was the last part of the population that actually was able to get a bachelor's degree under the Pell Grant, and the prisoners, they represented less than 1% of those who were actually benefiting from the Pell Grant before the outcry of the community. And so I think that strong sense of self and challenging them is what allowed me to be successful educationally. So as educators, I think that's a critical point.
Hello, good morning. Me and my sister have unconventional conference etiquette, so she kind of has a question, and I kind of have one too, so bear with us, and we apologize. But my question is, at what moment did you realize you were getting out, that specific moment, and then how did you feel when you knew the people that you were in there with weren't coming with you? How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Are they coming together? The questions coming together?
My question is completely unrelated, so you can just
Okay,
answer
so
it
answer
first.
that one. So part of my background and the work that I did while I was in prison, besides graduating from school, was I was a paralegal, so I helped a lot of people do legal work. And so I knew how to read the law. And so when this started, 2005, then 2010, they had a decision, then 2012, I had a sense of where the court was going. And so I was preparing myself for this potential opportunity. And so I was actually engaged, and similar, Ghani has shared the same. I was engaged with the Lifers organization at Greater Ford at the time. And Lifers organization goal is to fight for parole eligibility for lifers because Pennsylvania has a large population. And so a lot of these men have become like family to you. This is one of the things I often talk about. They are closer than your family, because you spent 30 years. I spent 31 years with many of these men. And so that's one of the things we were talking about. And so one of the things since we've been out, I know Ghani works with the CABI group, which is, what's the acronym?
The Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration.
Which is life sentences. And one of the things I've been doing is, so me and another guy that got his life sentence commuted, we did a documentary called The Mayor of Greater Fort, which highlights our lives since we transitioned back to the community. And one of the things they use, so we have different senators throughout the state be inviting us to events so that we can educate the public about who lifers are, because, you know, the idea that they thought we were irredeemable, they're doing the same thing to the lifers that are currently still locked up. And so we go around and talk to people and give them a face of what a lifer is, because I was just a lifer. I wasn't considered a juvenile serving a life sentence. I was a lifer. And so the same men and women, and and that's one of the things I've been saying, just men, but there are women as well that serve a life sentence. So we go around in different places trying to create that conversation about the fact that those people who are still currently incarcerated are equally deserving of this opportunity. And Ghani, one of the things, I give him, you know, a lot of props. They've been going to different states trying to build coalitions amongst different, not states, but counties, to build coalitions throughout the county about life sentences, because you got Philadelphia and Allegheny, and in between, you know what they say. And so we trying to change that perception throughout by going different places. And you know what people often say is, well, you're the exception, you know. But at one time, they said I was irredeemable, though, so.
When I found out that I was going home, when I knew I was going home, that the parole board granted me parole after I was sentenced to time served to life, I was a mixed bag of emotions. I think the three main ways I felt was, one, I was definitely happy, really for my mother. You know, I was happy for my mother that she would get her son back. But it also, but what kept my kite tied to the ground was another mother is not able to get her son back. And so I tempered my jubilance. I had to make sure and keep that really disciplined. And the other piece was, the other way I felt was survivor's guilt, because I was leaving behind a lot of friends. You know, it's kind of like if you were people in a car accident and one person survived, how they feel about everyone else, you know, that survivor's guilt. And so this is one of the reasons why, you know, I've been really involved with trying to push these two pieces of legislation, SB 135 and HB 135. Well, I think they're going to change the name SB 135 when it's reintroduced. But these two bills are about parole eligibility for people sentenced to life without parole, you know, trying to help other people come home, you know, or at least, you know, be able to see a parole board to have the opportunity to come home and join the struggle.
To answer your question, do you remember when, I don't know if it was the Mega Million or the Powerball was up to $1 billion? You remember the person that won that? I was happier than that person. Much more happier, but the challenge was, like you said, was leaving, because it's so many. My biggest resource today are formerly incarcerated men and women. And so it was so hard leaving them behind, knowing that a lot of them were innocent and the struggles that I've gone through. And so I ended up going back into the maximum security prison that actually housed me, and took my curriculum inside the prison system, which is housed on the DOC website. And so I've been making my life journey to travel from prison to prison in order to educate and to make sure that I give forward to everything that other individuals have given me.
So, and I do as well. I get the fortune of going back into prison. And so I just recently went, not too long ago, Villanova graduating class. They asked me to come in and say a few words to the graduating class. And so, but I go back in, and people often ask, you know, how does that feel? And I said, well, it's really not about me, because I know by me going in, I provide hope for them, because they see the things that I'm doing out here. And so it provides that level of hope. I think, to me, one of the greatest blessings I had was Philadelphia, as y'all probably familiar with, they got one of the most progressive DAs now around the country. And so they had a new DA training taking place, and they allowed me to participate in it, to do a workshop and take them into the prison to meet lifers and facilitate a workshop so that they got the opportunity to see the importance of what justice looks like by seeing these men serve a life sentence, and a lot of them were seriously impacted by that.
So I have
Yeah.
a wondering.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Who's speaking? I just want to make sure. I'm sorry, sis. We got to close it down. But I'm going to, right. But can you all stay around for a little bit? I think there's some folks who want to talk to you. Before we close it out, can you end on a moment, a spirit of hope? Maybe just say one thing, a few words to everybody in the room to send us off for the rest of the day.
I would probably say, so one of the things I think I've been fortunate in coming out and try to better understand young people because I've been through that experience. And so I've been going through different trainings. And there's one particular training that I went through by a doctor named Dr. Ken Ginsberg. And he teaches trauma-informed practices and how you deal with children. And one of the things that he said was, learn to love the child despite the behavior that they sometimes need to display, because it's not really a reflection of who they are, but it's some of the things that they're actually going through. And so what we know that they're going through is many of the environmental traumas that are around them. And so learn to love them, and eventually they will come around because they know that you love them. And so that's one of the things I would say, just to pass on.
Let's give them some love. Thank you so much.
What a phenomenal panel. Let's give them another round of applause, please. As we get ready to take a brief break, I'd like to remind you to make certain that we're sharing the conversation beyond the walls, that you're tweeting and going to your Instagram page and sending out photos and sending some of the quotes that you've been hearing today. Just make sure that we're making certain that other people who were not fortunate enough to be in this space are also able to witness what you all are witnessing here today. Thank you again to the panelists. Please stay for a photo, and you all will see you in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
No doubt. I mean,